Some call it a turning point. The outrage over the carnage and desolation left behind by retreating Russian forces north of Ukraine's capital will probe war crimes accusations in the Kyiv suburb of Bucha and ask, now that this war is definitely set to last, is the Kremlin's ultimate objective to occupy Ukraine or reduce it to rubble? Moscow's been quick to preempt calls for a war crimes tribunal by requesting a UN Security Council meeting and accusing the Ukrainians of staging a gruesome trail of evidence, enough to keep on board fans of Putin like Hungary's now re-elected Prime Minister Viktor Orban. European leaders insist they won't stand idle after Bucha, with natural gas-dependent Germany now wondering aloud if it's time to shut the tap on Russian imports sooner rather than later, and France's president talking about a full embargo on Russian oil and coal. Outrage du jour, or are we really at a turning point? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the Russian strategy in Ukraine and wondering if it is indeed a scorched earth policy. With us from Kyiv, human rights lawyer Alexandra Matviuchuk, chair of the Center for Civil Liberties. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
From Berlin, Markus Ziener, resident senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
France 24 correspondent Dave Keating is in Brussels, where EU finance ministers have been huddling over the bloc's next step. Nice to see you.
Good evening, Francois.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it's been 40 days now since Russia launched its invasion, parachuting forces in that tried and failed to secure Kyiv's Hostomel airport. They've since quit positions now north of the capital. And that means the whole world's discovering what's left in their wake. Ukrainian authorities claiming a body count of 410 in cities they've liberated. The country's president going to Bucha himself this Monday.
It's very important for us to see journalists here on the field. It's key. I want you to show the whole world what happened here, what the Russian soldiers, the Russian Federation committed here in Ukraine.
Alexandra Matviuchuk, that body count that they're talking about, 410 killed, can you break it down for us? Because some people died during the fighting because they didn't have access to treatment. Some were killed in the crossfire. Some were summarily executed. What do we know?
We gathered testimonies from people from Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka, Matyzhin, even before these cities were liberated, because some people were lucky to escape and to leave these isolated by Russian troops cities. And we had already horrible stories about beating, about enforced disappearances, about tortures of people and killings of civilians. But when this video and photo emerged after liberation of the cities, frankly speaking, I was in total shock. Because when I see this picture, when civilians, men and women, lay on the street, dead, with their hands tied under their back, I really don't understand, like, from what moral norm can be follow these Russian soldiers in order to do such horrible things.
And what did the people of Bucha tell you on that score?
They tell us that they live in terror for whole this time of occupation, and this is prohibited for Russians troops and for any army in the world, because even during the war, you have to follow the norm of international humanitarian law, and you have to provide a clear distinction between military and civilians. But Russian troops don't provide these distinctions. They beaten people, they kidnapped people, they torture people. We have several cases of sexual violence against women, but it's the most hidden crimes. That's why I don't know about the scope. And unfortunately, now everybody knows about deaths of people who were killed unarmed civilians by Russian soldiers.
The Ukrainian president on Sunday was talking about the need for some kind of mechanism to document these war crimes. So what is the procedure at this point?
He means the existing in international law procedure, which is called International Hybrid Tribunal. Why we need this International Hybrid Tribunal? Everybody knows that International Criminal Court have already opened investigation, and they work even on the ground. They have a group in Ukraine. But according to their policy, International Criminal Court will focus only on top official and will cover some concrete episodes of crimes. If we will be able to launch the International Hybrid Tribunal, this mechanism can cover every crimes which were committed during this war, and this is very important for us, not to have any crimes unaccountable. And also, this international hybrid tribunals can have jurisdiction over the crime of aggression, because unfortunately, International Criminal Court have not such jurisdiction yet.
France 24's Gulliver Cragg, by the way, followed the Ukrainian military in its northward advance. He filed this report.
By the wreck of the world's biggest plane, Ukraine's defense minister rewards the troops. One of the first sites occupied by Russia in late February, the Hostomel airfield is now back under Ukrainian control.
The people of Kyiv are praying for you and for us to kick those bastards out of our whole country. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine.
The celebration is muted, though. The battle was won at huge cost.
Я не можу розказати, як було.
Це ще не побєда. Це тільки початок. Побєда буде, коли всіх заб'є. Людей жалко.
The towns in this district have been devastated. As of Sunday evening, 410 civilian bodies had been found in Kyiv region. The final count will be higher. But this neighborhood appears to have been spared the worst of the violence.
The Russians were here. They went from house to house looking for something. I don't know what they were looking for. Since the 4th of March, we've had no electricity, no water, no gas, so we cook our food out here.
No electricity also means no news. So part of the soldiers' task here now is to inform.
The Russians say they want to establish control over the whole Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
So there'll be an escalation out there?
Yes, inevitably, but we're ready for them. They pretend they chose to pull out of this region, but really we bombed them so hard their units can't fight.
This advancing column was destroyed 3 weeks ago. The Russian soldiers' bodies still lie strewn around.
The Russian occupiers were trying to use this road to get to Kyiv from Hostomel via Irpin. We blew up the bridge and the units of the Army and National Guard and their vehicles. And so this is the place where their advance on Kyiv was definitively stopped.
Though proud of this victory and relieved that Kyiv region is now free of Russian troops, Ukrainians are also wondering what might be the Russians' revenge.
Well, Gulliver Cragg joins us now from Kyiv. Gulliver, as you say in your conclusion there's this, on the one hand, this pride in the fact that they've been able to keep Kyiv out of Russian control, but this fear that, the other shoe might drop.
Yeah, I should tell you I'm not in Kyiv anymore. I left. I'm in central Ukraine right now in Vinnytsia region, but I was in Kyiv just this morning. And yeah, there is something of a atmosphere of greater hope and relaxation in Kyiv on the one hand, because the Russian forces have left that region. But more than that, I think Ukraine is really a country in shock at the moment, like most of the world, perhaps, seeing these images that are coming out of Bucha and other places that Russian forces have left. It's hard at the moment to assess the scale of it. Perhaps, as you saw in my report, the people who are living in Bucha and who didn't leave, they're living, the people I spoke to anyway, in a neighborhood where the Russians didn't apparently shoot people dead. They went round people's houses and wondered what they could steal. But according to the people I spoke to, they were reasonably civil. So it seems that some Russian units had different instructions than others or behaved in different ways than others. We don't know why this happened or what the scale of it was. It certainly wasn't the whole of Bucha that was strewn with the bodies of dead civilians. It certainly wasn't the whole town that was affected, but there's small comfort in that when you hear the more and more information that is coming in from other places that have been liberated by the Ukrainian army from Russian forces. And it seems like in many, many places that the Russian troops occupied, they behaved in similar ways in the sense that they shot innocent civilians, sometimes shooting them in the back of the neck, and other war crimes that there are numerous witness accounts describing really, really terrible things. Ukraine's general prosecutor says that the village of Bogdanivka, which is some way to the west of Bucha, she said that it's the one we're more likely to remember in the long run because things there are worse.
Yeah, things worse. Russia recalibrating its focus, it says, as you point out in that report, to the Donbass and continuing to pound the besieged port city of Mariupol, where the International Committee of the Red Cross still can't get in. The Reuters news agency filed images Sunday from inside Mariupol, where, according to the mayor, 90% of buildings are destroyed. Take a look.
People helped us. Deepest gratitude to them. Our guys left us to the mercy of fate. Now we are cooking pancakes. The grace will be with us. We just keep living, right?
Marcus Ziener, is there a feeling in Germany that Bucha is a turning point?
Absolutely. I think the pressure is on now on the German government to do more, and doing more means to more seriously talk about the prospect of cutting off gas from Russia. And I think that's the debate we're having right now, under the impression of what's happening in Bucha. Now, at the same time, what was really stunning today is to see that the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, he came up admitting that he made a mistake about his assessment of how to deal with Russia in the past. You have to see that Steinmeier, he was the right hand of Gerhard Schröder, who is now an executive with Gazprom, the former chancellor of Germany. And he was seen as the architect of this policy, some call appeasement policy, with Russia. And him now admitting that he was on the wrong track, I think is the most visible statement so far we have seen for Germany being in the midst of a debate about how to deal with Russia and what mistakes we did in the past.
That mea culpa hit home by remarks we heard from Ukraine's president on Sunday, Volodymyr Zelensky, who spoke to CBS and named and shamed past German and French leaders. Let's listen.
I invite Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Sarkozy to visit Bucha and see what their policy of concessions towards Russia has led to in 14 years. See with your own eyes the tortured Ukrainians and Ukrainian women.
Marcus Ziener, your reaction to those remarks?
Well, it's understood that that the president and also the ambassador here from Ukraine in Berlin, that they are lashing out against the Germans, that they are saying, well, you're doing not enough and you made so many mistakes in the past. Although this is true, and you have to keep in mind that Germany is on the path of turning green energy-wise, which means that the idea was to bridge that gap we are having by phasing out CO2 emissions because of phasing out of coal and nuclear energy, and that this gap should have been bridged by having gas from Russia for the next, let's say, 10 years. Now, this idea of how to bring about the whole kind of change of our energy system that was based on the fact that we were assuming that our relationship with Russia would continue the way it was. And this is now the huge kind of break of this illusion we had, and this that's why everybody now is scratching their heads and trying to figure out what went wrong and how can we remedy this.
Yeah, this, Dave Keating, could be a seminal moment. You and I were talking about it earlier, because there are smaller nations like Lithuania that say they're severing themselves from Russian gas. But Germany, in terms of bulk, is the biggest customer when it comes to Russian natural gas. And the remarks you're hearing there from Markus Zehner are underlined by the fact that you have this huddle on Monday of EU finance ministers.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly,
when it comes to
these are discussions that are happening right now as we speak.
Go ahead, Dave Keating.
Okay, so these are discussions that are happening right now as we speak in Brussels, and essentially they're looking at how they can include energy without making the European economy really suffer, and suffer more than the Russians would be feeling on their side. Because this has been the concern for the past weeks. Every time this is brought up, having a ban on energy imports from Russia, we have German leaders saying, if we do this, it would hurt us more than it hurts Russia, because the EU is so heavily dependent on imports of Russian gas, especially 45% of gas imports to the EU come from Russia, 25% of oil. We did have talk 2 weeks ago, increasing talk, that maybe they could agree a phased-in ban on just coal and oil, but leave gas, because it's easier to get oil from elsewhere because it's already in liquid form, can go over ships, and it would be harder actually for Putin to do anything else with the gas that he has, because it goes by pipeline to the EU, so it would be something that he probably couldn't turn off. But that kind of went away, so we had that talk the week of all the summits here in Brussels. Then that kind of dissipated. Last week we didn't hear much about it, but I hear today it's really back with a vengeance, and it is because of these images that we're having come out of Bucha. They have really shocked people, and this has put this back on the table. The question is, how do you do it without it ending up hurting the EU and average people living in the EU more than it actually hurts the Russians? That's what they're discussing right now.
Yeah, and we heard the day begin with Emmanuel Macron, who's 6 days out from running for re-election here in France, calling for an embargo on Russian oil and coal.
I've always said that we needed dissuasive sanctions. With what just happened and what is happening in Mariupol, we need to send a signal that today it is our collective dignity and it is our values that we need to defend.
Ce sont nos valeurs que nous devons défendre.
Dave Keating, what does he mean by dissuasive sanctions?
Well, I think the idea here, and Macron has said this in the past, that sanctions have to have a dissuasive effect. They can't just be for the purpose of sanctions. He was saying this at his press conference after the NATO summit 2 weeks ago as well. And the dissuasive effect has to be that the sanctions need to convince Putin to change course here. They need to convince Putin to go to the negotiating table and end this conflict, or at the very least stop these atrocities that we're seeing in Ukraine. And if they don't have that effect, if there's no realistic expectation that for whatever reason a fifth wave of sanctions that includes the energy bans would prompt a change in Russian behavior, then they need to be looking at things that would prompt a change in Russian behavior. In other words, sanctions for sanctions' sake don't achieve anything. They have to have this end goal in mind, which is changing Russian behavior and making Russia end this war. So that's where he wants to keep the focus. It's not to say that he's opposed to energy sanctions. I'm hearing various things about what France's real position is on this. But it is to say that the focus should be on the end result, not the vehicle, which would be the sanctions.
Gulliver Craig, again, if you've just come back from Bucha, how does this all sound?
We know for a long time Ukrainians have basically been totally bewildered that if there are any sanctions that could yet be applied that haven't been applied yet, what is the world waiting for? I mean, that's what I hear from almost every Ukrainian I speak to be honest.
Alexandra Matviuchuk?
I think that we have to await from Western allies such kind of sanction which can stop Putin in Ukraine, which can show Putin and his surroundings that he will pay an enormous price for a further invasion. Because if we go into detail for current sanctions and take, for example, SWIFT, we will see that only several Russian banks are banned from SWIFT. Among the several banks, there are no Sberbank, which is the biggest bank of Russia. And this provides opportunity to Russian economy to recover and to continue to feed this war.
Marcus Zener, these banks that are not under sanctions, they say it's because they need to facilitate those Russian gas imports on which they still depend in places like Germany. Nonetheless, we heard this announcement on Monday of Germany for the time being taking over the German branch of Gazprom. How does the argument hold up not to sanction these Russian banks?
Well, as you said, it's about how to facilitate the transactions for getting the gas and paying for the gas. I mean, the whole debate is based on the assumption that once we cut off Germany or Europe, the European Union from Russian gas, this is going to change course in Russia with regard to the war in Ukraine. I mean, this is an assumption. We don't know whether this is holding up. This is something we can't assess at this point. This is the one thing, and secondly, if you look at the impact this is going to have on certain branches in Germany, for instance, the chemical industry, this is going to be pretty tough. Now, you may say, well, in light of what's happening in Ukraine, having those repercussions is something Germany should actually bear. This is definitely a point you can make, and this is a point worth thinking about. But we just the other day we had an announcement by the head of BASF, one of the biggest chemical companies in Germany, saying, if we go down that road, this is going to cripple our industry or our company, resulting in tens of thousands of layoffs. So that's why everybody really is not really happy being in that dilemma.
Not really happy being in the dilemma. We did hear the finance minister talking about ways to cut natural gas imports sooner rather than later. He says it's too soon to halt all Russian gas import, an embargo on all Russian gas. But says his country's working on cutting business ties with Moscow. The economy minister, for his part, announcing this Monday, again, that Berlin is taking over Gazprom's German subsidiary.
This means that we're working every day to create the conditions and the steps of an embargo. The federal government and myself are convinced that this is the right way, and this is also the one which has the strongest daily impact on Putin. In this sense, we're on the right path, and this week will allow us to continue to progress in this direction.
It sounds, Marcus Zener, like he's giving himself a lot of wiggle room, moving towards an embargo, but of course there's nothing specific yet.
Yeah, he wants to have more time to bring that change about. I mean, this is he's in a very unpleasant situation right now. He was in Qatar just the other week and trying to negotiate gas deliveries to Germany. But this is something that takes a lot of time. And if you look how Germany could get LNG, liquid gas, I mean the ports that can receive the liquid gas are mainly based in places like Spain. But then you get the gas, the LNG in Spain, but how do you get the gas to Germany? I mean, there is just a lack of infrastructure to getting it there. So on the one hand, there's a desperate attempt to look for alternatives. But everybody knows that this will take time. This will take time. I mean, we're talking here about a year at least, and which is way too long to have some kind of impact on Russia regarding this war.
Gulliver Cragg?
I wanted to ask something because I'm not sure what the details of this are, but my understanding is that Germany has refused to cancel the shutting down of its remaining nuclear power plants. And viewed from Ukraine, that seems like a decision that would suggest they haven't really understand how seriously this situation is, because if they're talking about the economy being crippled if they stop importing Russian raw materials, I mean, surely leaving the nuclear power plants open would be one way to at least alleviate that somewhat. But maybe somebody who's more in the know would have an answer as to why they can't do that. But it's certainly something they're very much criticized for from Ukraine. I mean, Ukrainians cannot understand why they closed down these nuclear power plants.
Marcus Ziener?
Yeah, we have 3 power plants running at this point, and they are scheduled to phase out at the end of the year. And in fact, there is a huge debate now about whether we should at least keep them running. Although one has to see that the percentage of those power plants, we're talking about a little less than 10% to the whole energy mix in Germany. But still, I mean, this would help. On the other hand, I mean, who is in the government of Germany? It's one of the parties, one of the bigger parties is the Green Party. And the Green Party, that's kind of part of their DNA to go out of nuclear, to make Germany green. And for them to accept and to admit that we probably have to shelve this idea, or at least to postpone it, is something that is difficult for them to digest. However, there was a statement by the Minister of Economics, Robert Habeck, the other day, which was really interesting because he was asked the same question, what are we going to do about our nuclear power plants, and asking whether we could kind of extend the running time. And he said, this is not ruled out, and which is quite a step forward. So we're probably seeing more of a debate coming.
More of a debate coming. I
think Zelensky should make a message to them about that then.
More of a debate coming. And at the same time, you heard earlier our Brussels correspondent Dave Keating talking about how they're going to try to up the pressure consequently on Vladimir Putin. There's an outlier in all of this. Putin himself sending a message of congratulations this Monday to Viktor Orban, who's been reelected with a 2/3 majority as Prime Minister of Hungary, Dave.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think Brussels is still digesting this. This was the expected result, even though the United Opposition and Viktor Orban's Fidesz party were polling neck and neck. The reality is that Orban has changed the constituencies so much that any opposition would need to win by, I think the estimates were 5 to 6 points in order to wrest control. Not only did that not happen, but he also maintained his 2/3 majority. I think that was the surprise. I think the thinking was that it was very, very unlikely that he was going to be voted out yesterday because of the way the system works, but that maybe he could lose his supermajority. He did not. So I think the lessons, people are wondering, are there lessons here that can be applied to anywhere else? I mean, it does seem that Orban's close relationship with Putin and his real reticence to support Ukraine and even having nasty things to say about President Zelensky didn't seem to hurt him among the domestic population in Hungary. But of course, Hungary is a very particular situation. His party has a real iron grip over the media and the messaging that people receive there. So does this have lessons for other far-right leaders, perhaps Marine Le Pen in France? I think that's what people are wondering. I think, though, that Hungary is such a particular case that maybe there aren't lessons for elsewhere.
Yeah, the evidence is there for all to see, Alexandra Matviachuk. But when, again, we look at our election that's taking place here in France next Sunday, Emmanuel Macron is faced with at least 3 candidates who are sympathetic to Vladimir Putin and are willing to play down the war in Ukraine. Your thoughts on, is Putin weak or strong right now?
It's decided for current moment in the debate which is going on in your TV show, in the political premises, in the room where the decision is taking place. Because the question is not that Western democracies don't understand what has to be done in order to make Putin weak and to stop him and to stop this war, which provoke enormous casualties among civilians. But the question is whether Western democracies will able to go from the zone of comfort and to take these necessity steps. In this regard, I would like to remind that France and Germany have a special responsibility for the whole situation, because France and Germany was the members of Normandy format after 2014, when Russia started occupation of Crimea and hybrid war in the Donbass. And parallel, Germany built Nord Stream 2. So now when we hear about dependency from Russia, it's a result of such behavior. And German leadership has to be on the level of historical challenges which we face, because now it's not question about Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is only a forefront of the battle of the values of free world for current moment.
All right, that's how it's seen in Ukraine. It's how it's seen by a majority of people here in France. In the rest of the world, it's a different question. And when Russia takes its case to the Security Council on Tuesday, it's expected to do so, we'll be hearing pronouncements like that we heard earlier from the Russian foreign minister.
На днях очередная фейковая атака была предпринята.
The other day, another fake news attack was undertaken in the town of Bucha in the Kyiv region after the Russian military had left according to the plans and agreements. Several days later, a fake video was staged that is now being spread through all media channels and social media by the Ukrainian representatives and their Western patrons.
Marcus Ziner, it's also an information war. Are we underestimating the Russians? Because that statement may seem scandalous and outlandish to a lot of people who are following Ukraine closely, but elsewhere in the world, maybe they agree with Sergei Lavrov.
It's an information war, and for quite some time we were convinced that this information war is won by the Ukrainians, because Zelensky and others are doing, and they still do, a very good job in framing information and in disseminating their information. This is the one thing. On the other hand, I just wanted to get back to what Alexandra just said earlier. I think more and more, and in particular in light of what happened in Bucha and other places in Ukraine, it becomes clear that this is not just a Ukrainian-Russian kind of war, that it's about much more. And let me just refer to what RIA Novosti, the Russian news agency, had put out. There was a commentary by one of the editors basically saying that denazification, that's the word they're using for what one of the goals they actually want to achieve in Ukraine, denazification is also de-Ukrainization, which means to kind of dismiss the right for Ukraine to further exist as a sovereign state. So this is a more radical tone and a much different approach as we have seen before. And then if this goes far beyond what we thought a couple of weeks ago, and my take is that this will not stop with Ukraine. This will go further, and this could, once Ukraine, in one way or the other, it can go beyond and could lead to other military action in other places.
And Alexandra Matviachuk, that commentary by RIA Novosti, effectively also saying that soldiers in the field are covered if they do kill people and commit atrocities.
Yes, we translated this article into English and I spread it, because if we will qualify all atrocities which we have for current moment as genocide, we will use also this program article which explain Russian deliberate policy in it. And I totally agree with the previous guest of studio that it's not a question only about Ukraine. If we will not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further, and it will be only a matter of fact what the new country will be a next target. Because if you read this article and hear other official Russian propagandist and official Russian statement, you will see that they publicly named Ukraine as an intermediate goals.
Gulliver Cragg?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think that it's Peter Pomerantsev who made this point, that an information war is a little bit of a misleading term because it suggests that both sides are, as it were, using the same weapons. And that's what the Russians appear to think about the Ukrainians. The Russians completely make up fake news. That piece in RIA Novosti also contains in it completely baseless allegations about the behavior of Ukrainian forces in Donbass. And the Russians clearly think that the Ukrainians are doing the same, or they want the world to believe that the Ukrainians are doing the same and just making up fakes. There's basically no evidence that the Ukrainians are doing anything like that. And I can only call on the Ukrainian authorities and military to continue to do everything they can to make the evidence available to journalists so that people can really show that there is evidence for what the claims that the Ukrainians are making and what they're accusing Russia of, whereas Russia just basically levels ridiculous accusations at Ukraine without providing any evidence. It's a very, very different tactics, if you like, if we want to call this an information war.
Gulliver, let me ask you about that de-Ukrainification, I'm sorry, I hope I'm quoting it correctly, that Marcus Ziener was talking about a moment ago here, because you're just back from the front lines, and the evidence of the Russians pulling back.
They're not the front lines anymore.
Well, they're not the front lines anymore. What were the front lines up until a couple of days ago? And the evidence of the Russians pulling back, you witnessed it. We know that our teams in Kharkiv are witnessing as well that they're continuing to pound Ukraine's second city. They're moving around to the Donbass. Is there the sense now that the initial lightning wind didn't happen? It's 40 days into the campaign. Is there the sense that Russia's ultimate aim remains to have regime change in Kyiv, or simply, well, to reduce the country to rubble?
Well, I wonder how authorized from the top that piece in RIA Novosti was. I mean, it certainly seems to be suggesting that the aim clearly still has to be regime change. I would say, though, that Kyiv was breathing a sigh of relief after Russian forces left the whole of Kyiv region. And there's certainly some people who argue that Russia has now realized it will never be able to take the Ukrainian capital or topple the government, and will try to take these areas of eastern Ukraine and try to settle for that. It's terrible to say it, but that's kind of the optimistic viewpoint at the moment. The more pessimistic viewpoint is that no, that they will, reeling from this humiliation, that they will come back and try to seek revenge, perhaps by using deadlier weapons.
As they've sought revenge, Alexander Mavyachuk in Mariupol, because the city, resisted back in 2015.
Yes, that's why Russia isolated Mariupol and don't provide any permission for International Committee of Red Cross to evacuate local people from there and injured people. And we, for weeks, received requests for help from people who stand in basement without water, food, electricity, medical care. And this is a humanitarian crisis which we observe like when Russian troops blockade the whole city. But I only want to add to the previous comments very important detail, because there is an illusion that Putin is afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of democratic future of Ukraine. And he will not stop only on Donbass, on eastern region of Ukraine, because he started this war in 2014 when we collapsed authoritarian regime and obtained a chance to provide a quick democratic transformation of the country. Putin is afraid of ideas of freedom who become more closer to his border and provide the existential threats to his own corrupt authoritarian regime. And that's why he will not stop before Russia will transfer it by themselves.
Marcus Ziener, how seen from Berlin now? You were telling us earlier how we had this startling mea culpa from Germany's president today, the former foreign minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier. In view of all we've been describing, is there a sense of national unity, or are Germany's fault lines exactly the same as they were before this war began?
No, we on February 27, we had this remarkable speech by our Chancellor Olaf Scholz to telling the public that we're basically changing that we have an about face when it comes to German foreign policy, in particular when it comes to Russia, and propping up our military, sending weapons to Ukraine. So there was a sense that, okay, now Germany has found its footing, they kind of have a changing course, and they will continue doing this. But this energy that was unleashed 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, that kind of dissipated, unfortunately. And now we are talking about why are we still so slow in sending weapons to Ukraine? Why are we still talking more about the economy than about politics when it comes to sanctions? And I think now after Bucha and the other things we're learning right now, probably the impression will sink in that, as I said earlier, that this is not only about this war, that this is about much more. And if this is what is common sense in Germany, then we probably see a different and a more powerful approach by the German government.
Dave Keating, you've told us how sanctions take time to work. Is the conversation in Brussels, which is home not just to the EU but also to NATO, switching from sanctions to weapons?
Well, there's kind of two camps. One camp wants to watch and see what the effect of the sanctions are before thinking about new ones, before thinking about a fifth wave. And then you have the other camp that says, no, everything we need to put, everything we've got into sanctions right now. That split is happening in the EU. And then on the other side of town at NATO, there's a very, very similar split when it comes to providing weapons to Ukraine, what can be provided, how it can be provided. You're seeing actually the pattern in both places is very similar. One, more cautious, not wanting to exacerbate the situation, and the other saying the situation is exacerbated. We need to do everything we can. I think that what we've seen today has moved the needle in both places, in both institutions, and that even though we were starting, I think last week everybody felt a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the will to act and the sense of urgency. And I think that today we've seen that slowdown reverse, and I think we're back to a real sense of urgency here today.
Alexandra Matviachuk, again, this was hammered home, and we showed it at the outset, by Ukraine's president, leaving Kyiv and going himself to Bucha. An important moment?
It's important because it showed that our authorities have the same and feel the same pain as all we feel now. I'm a human rights lawyer who have been documented war crimes for 8 years already, but it's too much to stand and too much to cope with. But what I know for sure that sooner or later we will win and Putin will lose because he wants to return Ukraine to the past, which not exist anymore. Ukraine chose a democratic way of development, and now we are fighting for the rights to have a democratic choices as such. And once again, why Ukraine is a key to Russia and why democratic transformation of Ukraine will provide a positive effect to the entire region. Before this large-scale invasion started in February this year, we have a very close connection with Russian human rights defender, and still now we try to help each other. And when I ask them how we can help you, because they are under constant pressure, they are labeled as international agents, they are persecuted in criminal way, etc., etc., they always answered, if you want to help us, please be successful.
And we'll leave it there for now. Alexandra Matviachuk, many thanks for joining us from Kyiv. I want to thank Gulliver Cragg in central Ukraine. You're reporting on our website, France24.com. Marcus Ziener in Berlin. Dave Keating, our Brussels correspondent. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.